So I've had the BLUETTI EP800 and B500 battery set installed for about a month or so now. And what I want to do right now is kind of go through a few tests trying to show you what this system can actually do, what am I actually going to be using it for, but then I also want to go through, talk about an actual real world use case that we recently had, and then I'll wrap up with kind of my final thoughts on this system as a whole. So let's get started. So if you're not familiar with this system, I did install this, I don't know, maybe a month ago. And this EP800 can output about 7.6 kilowatts of continuous power. And then beneath it are 3 B500 batteries, which have just shy of 5 kilowatts of battery storage. So overall, this stack here that I have is about 15 kilowatts of backup power. So I plan on using this system for all the outbuildings that we have here on the property, the barn, the coop, the horse run. And my goals are kind of twofold. The first one is going to be to just diminish the amount of power that I have to draw from the grid so that I can lower that grid electric bill. Woohoo! And then second of all, to provide backup power for these buildings in the event that we lose power. So let's see how we can push this system a little bit and see what all it's going to be able to run. So if we take a look at the B500 app, I'm going to hit this 3 dots and I'm going to switch to Bluetooth because I believe that it's got a faster connection when it's in Bluetooth. So you can see right now we have 100% battery and I might have one light on, which is why we're not seeing any consumption, because it doesn't reflect low consumption amounts. But if I reach around the corner and click on a couple more lights, give it a second. Okay, so there we go. Now we see it pulls from the grid real fast because of a quick surge, and now it's back to battery power. We're at 226 watt draw coming out of the battery. And that's with 3 barn lights on, plus a couple of lights in the shop. You know, not an awful lot, but we're pulling 225 watts. Some folks might want to use this system as just a backup system. They want to use the grid, they want this system to be fully charged, but only fall back to this in the event that the power is lost. So we're going to come into the BLUETTI app. I'm going to go to the gear, scroll down to self-consumption mode, and I'm going to switch over to backup mode and hit OK. And so you can see down here in this mode, the battery charges fully with solar energy and the grid, ensuring a seamless power supply during an outage. In this mode, power cannot be fed back to the grid. So this system effectively is in standby mode right now. All power is being routed from the grid, as we can see here on this display. We're pulling 224 watts from the grid. And so what I want to do is kind of simulate a grid outage so that you can see, if you use this as solely a backup, how fast does the system switch from grid over to battery. So I'm going to come over to this panel and I'm going to turn this breaker off, which is the grid feed to the BLUETTI system. And when I do that, you'll be able to see how fast the BLUETTI EP800 responds. So we're going to kill the grid power in 3, 2, 1, now. And that blink that you just saw is all you would notice. Looking at the app, now we have switched seamlessly from grid power over to battery power. Say grid's down, utility company finally gets things fixed, and we're going to turn grid power back on, simulating the grid coming back in 3, 2, 1, now. And so what the EP800 is going to do is it's going to sense that grid connection. It's going to make sure that it's stable, synchronize with the frequency of the grid, and we should see here shortly all of our load switching back over to the grid. And I don't know if you actually saw it, but that little flicker was the system switching back over to grid. Seamless transition, but as I stated a few minutes ago, I want to not only use this as a backup, but I want to use this as the ability to help remove some of my loads from the grid to hopefully help save me some money on an ongoing basis. So I went back and switched everything back to self-consumption mode. So this system will be the primary power source for my barns and outbuildings. And only when this value drops down to, I believe it might be 20%. So yes, if we look here under this working mode section, in this mode, the system uses energy to power your home during the day with any excess energy stored into the battery. At night, it uses stored energy to power your home. If the battery drops below 20%, the system will switch to grid power for needs while recharging the battery to 20% with solar energy first. Well, I have grid charging turned off because I only want to charge from solar. So when this drops down to 20%, it'll automatically fall back over to the grid, utilize that grid connection for powering my loads until the sun can recharge the battery over 20%. So I'm going to jump right into the biggest test that I can throw at this thing right now, and that is this ShopSmith Saw. Other small power stations have been unable to power this. Actually, the BLUETTI AC200L was the closest power station that I have tested that has been able to almost get this to spin over. I believe the startup surge on this is probably close to, was it 50 amps? And so it trips a lot of systems. So again, we are going to be in the Bluetooth connectivity mode for the app so that we can see in real time what the EP800 is doing. And I'm going to come right over here to the power switch and we are going to turn this thing on and see if it's going to fire this thing up. Let's find out in 3, 2, 1. Now. Sweet! So we're only up to 600 watts right now. It is on slow right now, so let's crank it up. See, a little bit comes from the grid just to help take care of the surge. 930 watts, but it took care of this no problem. And now, I really want to test this to see, is it the BLUETTI doing the surge? So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to kill that grid connection again. So there's nothing that the BLUETTI can fall back on. It's solely going to be reliant on itself. This is where the real fun stuff happens. So I killed the grid connection. We can tap into here and see grid information. There's no voltage, no frequency, no power coming from the grid whatsoever. So let's find out again if this can handle it without the grid's assistance. In 3, 2, 1, now. No problems whatsoever. I didn't even see the light blink. There we go, we're at 1.2 kilowatts now, 1.3. But you know what? Sometimes you've got to have your dust collector going when you have your saw, right? So, let's turn on the shop vac too. It's gonna get noisy in here, folks. In 3, 2, 1. Now we're pulling 2.3 kilowatts. 10 amps on leg 1, 7.8 amps on leg 2. What if I wanted to turn on my air filtration system? Let's turn that on. .3 kilowatts. Not bad at all. What if we wanted to run the sander at the same time? .3 amps on one and 8.7 on another one. Our alarms are just showing that we've got no grid right now. This thing's not even batting an eye. It's just getting so noisy in here. But a lot of these big tools here in my shop, there's really no issue running it. In the wintertime, we have to plug in the tractor and use the block heater to warm up the tractor before it will start. So there's our block heater right now, and this is just a resistive load. This is a big resistive load. So let's see what it does right now if I plug it in. So we look at 791 right now. No problems whatsoever. So it's probably at least a 500 watt resistive load. So should we go and turn on some of the other stuff again, huh? Oh, I forgot to mention, this little mini fridge is plugged in too. So let's turn on a fan, turn on the vacuum, 2.6, and the saw. Ooh, we got a good spike there, 6.6 kilowatts. And the sander, 2.9, 2.7. So as I was walking out into the barn, I saw one more piece that I want to try and see what happens when we run multiples of these together. And that was my Porter and Cable air compressor. A lot of times these air compressors, they're just like the ShopSmith Saw. They have such a big load that sometimes they tend to trip these things. So we're gonna try to fire up all these things together and see what happens. I don't think I have enough hands to turn them all on at the exact same time, but it should be pretty close. All right, so let's start these two at the same time. In 3, 2, 1, now. And the saw, now. And so we're easily pulling 3.5 kilowatts. 21 amps on leg 1, 7 amps on leg 2. And it just runs. Have the jigsaw. 3.7. You know, I was kind of expecting from some kind of inductive load to be able to trip this. But, I mean, I can turn a lot of these different things on, and I'm not having any problems. With the 7.6 kilowatts of available power in that inverter, it really gives you a massive ability to be able to power a lot of different devices. And I know that my barn aspect is a little different from your home, but think of it like this. If these big inductive loads like the saw and the vacuum can kick on, then it's not going to have any problems with your microwave or your lights. I mean, I've had these lights going the whole time. No problems whatsoever. And don't forget, I haven't turned the grid connection back on yet either. It's solely running off of the EP800. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned the fact that I wanted this to help remove usage from the grid to help save me some money, but also to be able to have backup power for my outbuildings in the event of a grid outage. Well, we actually had a grid outage about 2 weeks ago, and it lasted for 3.5 days. So we just got home from Heian's soccer game, ended up getting rained out. Had some fun driving on the roads with some pretty nasty weather. And when we pulled into the driveway, we hear the song of a native bird called the generator. And we got generators running all around us. But if we turn and we look this way, you can't really see it, but there's power at the barn. We still have power in the house. We had no grid power at all, and yet the house had its own power system, and then the barn and the outbuildings all had their own power thanks to the BLUETTI EP800 and B500 batteries. Normally during the summertime, you know, it's not huge if we don't have some power in the barn and some power in the coop. But a few days before we actually lost power, we actually got chicks. And the chicks need a constant heat source to actually be able to stay warm. And that's this brooder heater right over here on the right. And we needed to have power to be able to maintain that heat so that these chicks would survive. And over that 3.5 days, the BLUETTI was able to provide power every day. And even when we didn't have a ton of solar coming in, we had enough to be able to recharge the batteries, to be able to bring the capacity back up so that these guys could stay warm the entire time the grid was out. And our coop project is still a work in progress. And so in those 3.5 days when the grid was out, we were still able to utilize power tools being powered by the EP800 to continue work on our coop project and be able to continue to move forward and get fencing up, get doors made so that the chicks and these guys would have a place to go and get out of the elements. And so that was really the best use case and best test that I can think of, having an actual grid down scenario where I need to provide power. I need to keep those chicks warm. And it worked flawlessly. So final thoughts on this system since I've had it up and running for a month. I haven't found anything in my barn or in my outbuildings that it has not been able to power. I have not had any trips, no issues. I think the biggest issue that I've had, and it's not even an issue with the system, but the days without sun. Not being able to recharge the batteries sometimes because there's not enough sun. But that has nothing to do with this system. From the installation standpoint, I did talk about how it was a little frustrating dealing with the AC connections coming into the inverter. I did get a recommendation from BLUETTI to simplify this a little bit. In this junction box, if you remember, I tried to loop the wires and keep them as a continuous run. And their recommendation was to snip the wires and then wire nut them so that you're only dealing with a short run of wire instead of, you know, this huge monstrosity of wire. So then you've got your wire here and your wire here. So really, in my standpoint, I've got like 2.5 feet of wire that I have to mess with instead of a whole lot more. So that would have made the installation a whole lot simpler. The only other thing that I've found is a little bit frustrating are these MC4 connections. They give you a tool to be able to remove these, but it's very difficult to get the tool in here to remove any of these connections. It almost seems like these need to have a 90 so that you can slide the tool in, push to the side, and have it release the teeth for the MC4 connectors, because you're supposed to use it this way to go into the little tabs on the MC4 connector, but it's very difficult to get the tool in there. Now, for most people, that's probably not going to be an issue because once you plug those connections in, you're leaving it. For me, I'm always moving stuff around and changing things up. I'm still trying to wire more solar panels into this system. In fact, I'm actually using this half of my solar roof on my coop project to recharge the batteries on the BLUETTI system. And so 9 panels at 250 watts apiece gives me about 2.2 kilowatts of solar potential. So yeah, all in all, I am very happy with how this system has worked and performed. Not only does it look very nice, I mean, it just looks, when I look out the window and I see this nice, sleek system just sitting next to the barn, I just can't help but smile when I see it. But, you know, putting it through that grid outage test, I think this thing went from 100% capacity and it got down to 15% capacity before the grid came back on. And then it ended up switching over to grid bypass power. But 3.5 days, and that's including running that heater for the chicks. I'm still toying around with the idea of adding another battery on top of this. And then I'm looking forward to see how it handles during the wintertime. These have built-in heaters in the batteries. And I know I had some questions on the heaters in one of my recent videos. I haven't been able to find out a ton of information about the heaters in the batteries, but what I did find is if I go into the app under Settings, Advanced, there's this battery heating section, which I turned on, and the little question mark says, when turned on, if the ambient temperature remains below 15 degrees, part of the grid power will be used for battery heating. So I'm not exactly sure if the batteries themselves will prevent charging. If the battery temperature drops below 32 degrees, that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on and just see. But this talks about when those heaters will kick in. If I find out any more information on those, I will be sure to pass that information along. But yeah, it's been fun. It's worked great. I never know when the fans are kicking on because they're so quiet. Every other system that I've had, when they turn on, you still know that they turn on. But this thing, you could almost be walking right by it and never know. So, yep, I'm very happy with how this system has worked out so far. So with that, I'm gonna let y'all go. Y'all stay safe, stay cool, and we'll catch up with you later.